Hi there, welcome. Hope you're doing good. The introductory scene at the Quaid family farmhouse. Rosalie, the wife, resides with her 3 children and her husband, Quaid, who observes native Comanche tribal warriors approaching on horseback. He swiftly proceeds to the home to retrieve his rifle and instructs Rosalie to take the children and flee as quickly as possible. Quaid is struck and dies quickly while his wife and 3 children seek to flee by running, regrettably. All 3 youngsters are struck and murdered while fleeing. Quaid's wife, Rosalie, frantically traverses the woods and conceals herself, clutching the lifeless body of her youngest child, an infant. The Comanches conduct a quick search for her, but are unsuccessful in locating her as she is concealed beneath the rock formation. The narrative transitions to Fort Beringer, where Captain Joseph Blocker and his soldiers apprehend a runaway Apache family and return them to the fort, confining them in cages. Later that evening, the captain and his first sergeant, Thomas Metz, reflect on the battles they have endured together and the comrades they have lost. In the morning, Captain Blocker is called to Colonel Abraham Bigg's office, where he is informed that President Benjamin Harrison has mandated the release of Cheyenne War Chief Yellow Hawk, who is terminally ill with cancer, and his family, allowing them to return to their ancestral lands in Montana, the Valley of the Bears. He is the colonel's sole candidate to implement these orders due to his fluency in the indigenous tribal languages. The captain is notified that this will be his final assignment before retirement, tasked with ensuring their safe arrival. Initially, Blocker declines to comply with the colonel's directive, even when faced with the danger of a court-martial, detailing horrific acts he had personally observed Yellow Hawk inflict upon his soldiers. Blocker engages in a conversation with Jeremiah Wilkes, an East Coast journalist present in the office. Wilkes confronts him, highlighting that the captain has also perpetrated egregious acts against the locals, thus he should not consider himself virtuous. The colonel cautions the departing captain that his pension is jeopardized if he neglects his job, prompting Blocker to acquiesce grudgingly. Colonel Biggs furnishes him with documents endorsed by President Benjamin Harrison that would ensure safe passage should he face any impediments. The Blocker chooses the accompanying details. His reliable companion, First Sergeant Thomas Metz, his Buffalo Soldier, Corporal Woodson, his recent graduate, Lieutenant Kidder, and last, a young French-speaking recruit, Private DeJordan. Shortly after traveling several kilometers from Fort Beringer, Blocker intends to terminate the elderly man, commanding them to halt and instructing Chief Yellow Hawk to dismount his horse in his native language. Yellow Hawk acquiesces, and Blocker presents the elderly guy with one of the knives for combat. The chief declines the confrontation, inciting the captain's ire, who then commands that the chief and his son be shackled for the duration of the journey, and that the braids of the wife and her daughter be undone. Subsequently, the gang encounters the charred residents of the Quaid family. Blocker, Metz, and Woodson depart from the group to conduct an investigation. The captain discovers the husband's body, which has been scalped by the Comanche tribe. Upon his arrival at the charred residence, he discovers only Rosalie, who clutches her deceased child while seated beside a bed where her girls lie, shrouded in blankets, likewise lifeless. Due to her grief, Rosalie remains convinced that they are merely asleep. The captain convinces her to accompany him outside to the deceased, thereafter instructing his troops to procure shovels to excavate graves for her family. Consequently, they establish their camp atop the ridge for the night. That night, when the camp slumbers, Rosalie absconds with a pistol and proceeds to the gravesite in an attempt to end her life. However, Blocker trails her and confiscates the firearm. That morning, Captain Blocker is cautioned by Chief Yellow Hawk that the entire group is at risk due to the impending return of the Comanche warriors. Nonetheless, they will not differentiate between the settlers and the Cheyenne tribesmen. The chief requests that Blocker release them to assist in defending the group in the event of an assault. However, Blocker declines and instructs his soldiers to prepare for the voyage. The gang traverses mountains and valleys before being ambushed by the Comanche, initiating a gunfight. During the confrontation, Private Desjardins is struck and fatally wounded. The Cheyenne chief on horseback assists in the struggle by charging at the assailant and killing him instantaneously. Buffalo Soldier Woodson dismounts the adversary from the horse and strikes him before sustaining a terrible injury. The chief's son, Black Hawk, constricts one Comanche with his chains. The captain evades the enemy archers and retaliates to defend himself. Ultimately, the adversaries who remain unscathed in the conflict depart. The gang observes Rosalie angrily seize a pistol and incessantly fire at a deceased Comanche until the ammunition is exhausted. Blocker is once more convinced by Chief Yellow Hawk that he and his son can assist in combating the hostiles, after which he instructs Lieutenant Kidder to remove their bonds. They must camp in the mountain canyons overnight. The following day, the gang encounters the remaining 3 Comanches who have been killed. Captain Blocker concludes that Chief Yellow Hawk and his son likely departed the camp during the night, pursued them, and eliminated them. He is displeased with the Mets for permitting them to escape. The gang arrives at a military fort in Colorado and meets Lieutenant Colonel McGowan, where the injured Woodson is surrendered for medical care. Blocker inquires of McGowan whether Rosalie can reside with him till she secures transportation to her desired destination. McGowan concurs, although he advises that Rosalie may need to remain with him until Christmas due to the lack of transportation until that time. McGowan requests a favor from Blocker. He requests Blocker to make a detour to deliver disgraced Sergeant Charles Wills to his home base. Wills has murdered a family with an axe and is being returned to face execution by hanging. Blocker consents, but he must first transport the chief and his family to Montana. As the party prepares to depart the next day, with a convicted Sergeant Wills and 2 new escorts, Sergeant Malloy and Corporal Thomas, Rosalie inquire if Blocker can accompany him instead of remaining in Colorado. She feels uneasy residing in this location. The captain approves of her decision and instructs the kidder to prepare the horse for her. Rosalie, having received new garments, returns them to the chief's daughter, to whom she had been presented shortly after joining the company. Sergeant Wills and Blocker acknowledge one another before to their departure. The gang traverses the hilly woods, pausing intermittently to rejuvenate by the flowing springs. The trek persists until fatigue overtakes the group, prompting the captain to command a halt for the night. Nevertheless, Wills must be secured to a tree to prevent his escape. Wills recollects that Blocker and the entire Union committed several brutal acts against the Indians, particularly during the Battle of Wounded Knee, for which they may have faced repercussions. However, the captain responds that he was performing his duties, and it was not a personal vendetta. Subsequently, Rosalie and the 2 indigenous women proceed to the creek to cleanse the dishes. Rosalie observes a contingent of fur traders approaching on horseback during the darkest night and is subsequently abducted. Little Bear alerts the group while the captain and his troops, together with Yellow Hawk and Black Hawk, pursue them. They discover the fur traders' encampment and observe one of the abductors assaulting Yellow Hawk's daughter. Upon the return of the kidnappers to their tents, the captain and his team stealthily infiltrate the camp, assault the kidnappers within their tents, and eliminate them. One of his associates, Malloy, was slain during the altercation. Subsequently, Rosalie observes that the captain is shivering outdoors, and she persuades him to take refuge in his tent, which she has been utilizing during the deluge. Metz interrupts the talk to convey his exhaustion with the service, expressing his inability to continue any longer. This disheartens the captain. Metz proceeds to Chief Yellow Hawk's tent, presenting tobacco as a symbol of atonement and seeking forgiveness for the harm inflicted to his people. Subsequently, Wills, abandoned in the rain, pretends to suffer a coughing attack to elicit emotional sympathy from Lieutenant Kidder, therefore enticing him to release him from his restraints. Wills assaults Kidder, ultimately seizing his firearm and fatally killing him. The sound of gunfire rouses the camp, and Blocker shoots Wills as he flees on horseback through the woods. He instructs Thomas not to pursue him, as he will succumb to blood loss. Instead, Metz mounts a horse and follows. In the morning, the group discovers the dead of the 2 Metz and Wills. Metz possesses a firearm stained with blood and has sustained a gunshot wound to the head. Assisted by the chief, they inter Metz. However, the captain declines to inter Wills due to the anguish he has inflicted upon him. Upon arriving in Montana, in the Valley of the Bears, Blocker confronts Chief Yellow Hawk, who is gravely ill with cancer. They converse with one another. Blocker enumerates some of the finest individuals he lost in combat against Yellow Hawk and the Cheyenne warriors. Yellow Hawk replies that he has similarly experienced losses in the subsequent generation. The 2 guys engage in a handshake, signifying an apparent mutual act of forgiveness and camaraderie. Upon arriving to the Valley of the Bears, they inter the deceased Chief Yellow Hawk via a traditional Cheyenne burial scaffold. At that moment, an elderly man and his 3 sons come on horseback. The elderly man informs Blocker that he possesses the land. He asserts that he desires Blocker and his crew to depart, taking Yellow Hawk's body with them. The Blocker attempts to present the documents endorsed by the president, while the cowboy remains indifferent and issues a grave admonition. Rosalie aims a firearm at the elderly guy. The man observes her and questions her capability to pull the trigger. Rosalie ambushes him with ammunition and fatally wounds him instantly. The shooting commences, with Rosalie shielding the boy while Captain Blocker and his soldiers attempt to protect themselves. Regrettably, Black Hawk, along with his sister and daughter, has been killed, as has Corporal Thomas. 2 cowboys are deceased in the crossfire, as one attempts to flee. Captain Blocker retrieves his rifle and fatally shoots him in the back. Subsequently, Captain Joseph Blocker, Rosalie, and Little Bear are positioned at a railroad station, all attired elegantly. Rosalie is preparing to embark on a train journey to Chicago, accompanied by Little Bear, to commence a new chapter in her life. She bids farewell to Blocker, commending him for his virtuous character, expressing her profound gratitude for his sacrifices on their behalf. The captain presents Little Bear with his novel for future reading. The youngster expresses gratitude in his native tongue, and with tears, Rosalie bids the captain farewell before boarding the train with the small boy. Blocker starts to depart, however he is reluctant to persist in his military career. After deliberation, he pivots and boards as the train departs the station. This concludes the film. Thanks for watching.